magic is found in every room where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah, and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset, and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I am Hannah Bradderud.
And I'm Luke Freeman. And today, Hannah, it's just us. Usually we have Chris with us.
Yeah.
It's kind of like fun because it's novel. I feel a little guilty about that, but here we are.
Chris, we miss you.
Yeah, you can tell just how much we miss you. No, the dynamic will be different, so it'll be fun. Okay, so today our topic is imposter syndrome, right? What is imposter syndrome? How do we manage it? How do we move forward? And I'm excited about this because, Hannah, you have done a lot of learning about this, and I know I've shared this with lots of groups, and it's a real passion of yours, so I'm excited to learn. But before we jump into that, we have our question of the day. And since we're talking about imposter syndrome, which sometimes makes me anyway feel very unpowerful and not confident, I thought maybe we'd start our question with the opposite, which is, if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you have and why? So you want to start, Hannah?
I love this question. Sure, I'll start. And of course, I always have a hard time picking just one. So I'm going to pick one that actually is a twofer. I would love the ability to fly.
Game in the system. I like it.
Yep, always looking for a loophole there. But yeah, so the ability to fly is one that I always, I wish I could fly, right? But more specifically, I'd love to be able to fly and be simultaneously in two places. So if I could fly back to Norway right now and hang out with my family and live my Hannah in Oslo identity while I'm still here living my Hannah in Montana identity, and be able to be those two people in those two locations at the same time, that would be my superpower. So I don't know how you would shorten that and call it one thing, but that's what it would be.
Well, I did consider cloning myself as one potential answer. I'm not going to pick that one, but I think you got pretty close to that. But I would love to, just experience more of life. I think mine's on the same kind of vein and theme. But how I chose to do it is, if I could have like twice the lifespan that I typically would have, and also the ability to time travel, so that I could basically take a day, or at the end of every day, maybe I time travel to sometime in history, or sometime in the future, or sometime in my own life and experience, and have another day, bonus day. So if every day I had the opportunity to have a bonus day, I could kind of live this life that is great and is fulfilling and that I enjoy, but I could also just enrich it with these experiences and what I would learn. And then I would probably also not be able to handle the temptation of being able to manipulate history. So also to do good, that would be what would make it a super hero power, right? So I could go back and say, hey, let's stop this horrible thing from happening, or let's go back and learn what really was the root cause of something so we can prevent it again, or whatever. So yeah, really interesting. Good question. Okay, so our topic today, imposter syndrome. Excited to learn from you, Hannah. So I just want to start out by saying, what is it, and maybe what is it not?
Yeah. So, it's something that I think a lot of people experience, right? And part of it is that we feel like we're the only one who feels that way. Like we're the only one that doesn't belong or who doesn't quite fit in. But really what it is, if you look at the Webster dictionary, definition of imposter syndrome, it's a psychological condition that is characterized by persistent doubt concerning one's abilities or accomplishments, accompanied by the fear of being exposed as a fraud despite evidence of one's ongoing success. So it's basically this internal belief that I'm not good enough or I don't belong and somebody's going to find me out, that I don't actually belong here. I don't fit in. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough. I don't know enough. And yet here I am doing these things and I just hope nobody finds out, right? That's really the gist of what is the imposter syndrome. Luke, any thoughts from you? Like, have you ever felt that way?
Yeah, for sure. I think most people have experienced imposter syndrome on some level. And for me, it's interesting because I typically have a lot of privilege in being able to walk into a room and get some respect, in our traditional society, right? Turned 40 a little bit ago, so I'm officially a middle-aged white guy, I guess, and get to, benefit from that privilege often. But I still feel a connection to, the experience of imposter syndrome. And for me, the memories that are most kind of salient and just feel really like they happened yesterday are on leadership teams where I'm maybe the youngest person. And I'm always having to kind of question myself, is what I have to offer really what the team needs or what the organization needs? Or am I just so ignorant that I don't know what I'm saying? And these folks with more experience, they really see it the way it is and they really see what priorities should be. And I just need to cool my jets and defer to them. And so I really kind of question myself a lot in those settings. And then the other is, I spent kind of my whole career one, as I call it, in the nonprofit world and got to a point where I did feel relatively confident there. And I knew the game, knew what was going on. And as I transitioned over into kind of the business world, corporate world, whatever you want to call it, I definitely had these beliefs that there were some secret things that I didn't know that were going to hamstring me and make me really ineffective. Now, over the years, I've learned that that's not really the case. And a lot of those fears were unfounded. But they were really, they were real fears. And they made me feel like I really have to do my homework. I really have to, learn what's going to connect with people in a setting that I perceive to be relatively different. Although I've found that the differences are mostly around technicals and governance and not really around how organizations work. So I feel that less often now, but man, quite a bit of pain, quite a bit of anxiety when I think about kind of those experiences of imposter syndrome. So how about you, Hannah? I'm really interested kind of your experience, anything salient for you, any really crystallized memories that you're going to hold with you for the duration, as Chris would say?
Yeah, I think, I've had lots of different experiences where I felt like an outsider or that I didn't really belong or I didn't fit in or that whatever who I am wasn't really what people were really looking for. And so I don't know if it's exactly the same thing, but definitely growing up, I was a pretty nerdy and awkward kid, and I didn't always feel very confident. And so some of those situations, if I happen to be in a group where some of the more popular kids in the class were, I feel like this is not really me. I don't really fit in here. I don't really belong in this group. I think one of the most recent experiences, though, is, and because it's an example I've talked about a lot on this podcast, is as I kind of changed my identity from being not a runner to being a runner. And I started, pursuing a lifestyle where running is just part of my daily routine. When I first started running, it took a long time before I even would call myself a runner, right? Even though I was running several days a week, because I totally felt like an imposter. I'm like, I can't call myself a runner. Runners are like these really amazing super athletes, and that's not me. Yes, I'm training for this half marathon, and yes, I'm showing up, and I'm showing myself every day that I'm providing results that would indicate that I'm becoming a runner. But I definitely felt in those, first several months that I'm an imposter. I'm not really an athlete. I've never been an athlete. I'm playing in some new space here, right? But as I've talked about, as we've kind of evolved the conversations on the podcast, it starts with a change in belief about our identity, choosing our identity, and then aligning our beliefs to match our identity, and then aligning our actions to support those beliefs. And as I did that, and as I ran more and continued to gather evidence for my brain that yes, I am in fact a runner, because I'm running all the time. And now I'm also running competitively, only, for fun, but I'm enjoying it. And I get to call myself a runner. I finally chose that I'm just going to fully own that identity. I'm going to be that person, and I'm going to act with confidence. And as I did that, the feelings started to align, and I started to actually feel confident in this identity as a runner.
Yeah, I know it's been really, fun and motivating for me over the last year as you've taken up that mantle. I think it's been over a year, probably almost 18 months at this point. But to see your kind of like nervousness around it, like, can I really say this? But then at some point you made a leap where you're like, no, I own it. I feel enough confidence, or I'm going to choose to be confident enough that I move forward and lean into it. So, kudos. I love how encouraging that is to me, and hopefully to other people who want to try new things or walk into those situations that are intimidating and scary to some degree. So we've talked about, we've both experienced this. What does the science say, Hannah, as you've looked into this? Is this common? Is it normal, part of life? Are there some people that experience it more than others? What does science tell us?
Yeah, so the interesting thing is that almost 70% of the population has this experience at some point, right? And the curious part about that is that it seems like the smarter you are, the more susceptible you are to feeling this way. That also affects confidence levels, right? So the smarter you are, the more susceptible you are to not feel confident about the body of knowledge that you have. And I would add, this is Hannah speaking, but I believe that every human being sometimes feels insecure and as if we don't belong in some contexts, right? So as I kind of like to dive into the origins of words, a syndrome is often used in a medical term, right, as a group of symptoms that characterize an abnormality or some kind of condition. Makes it sound like a disease, like something is wrong with us if we're feeling this way. The other definition of a syndrome is that it's a set of concurrent things, right? So that could be emotions or actions that form some sort of identifiable pattern. And then what exactly is an imposter? Well, it's someone that assumes a false identity or title for the purpose of deception. So are we purposely trying to deceive people when we're feeling this way? I think most of us aren't, right? We're not purposely trying to deceive people. But then there's something about, this whole concept of you have to keep doing the thing before you become the thing. Like with the runner example, I had to keep running for a while before I could say that I am a runner. And so, Amy Cuddy, who I'm a big fan of, she has a book called Presence that really talks a lot about these different topics. But a quote from hers that I really like is, don't fake it till you make it, fake it till you become it. And so once you become it, you're no longer an imposter, even though you may have felt that way from time to time. And so, if that many people feel that way, and it seems to me like maybe this is just like a completely normal human experience and maybe not something to categorize as some kind of psychological, and it's certainly not mentioned in any of the manuals of psychological disorders. It's not at that level at all.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And, it's such a weird, example to think through. I think the running thing was really helpful. Like, to be confident and say that you're a runner, like you have to be a runner. Like you couldn't really, I guess maybe someone could like go to the gym and just be on a machine, right? And they do leg presses and maybe they are on an elliptical and they, do whatever. They do, calf exercises or whatever. And then they can jump out and do a half marathon. Like maybe technically someone could do that. I don't know. But that seems like, the much more common example would be someone runs so that they can say they're a runner. But like, isn't just the fact of going out and running a mile to prepare for a 5K, like they're a runner because they're out running that mile. So really, really interesting. And like when I apply that to, let's just use the work that we do as consultants, right? So, if I'm going to come in and help someone try and think differently about a problem, like maybe I've never tackled that problem before, but the fact that I'm showing up and walking through the door or joining the Zoom call and trying to solve the problem, like makes me a consultant, even though maybe I haven't been a consultant on that particular problem before. So, really interesting. Any other examples that come to mind for you, Hannah, of like just this paradox of trying something and the fact that we try it automatically kind of brings us feelings of imposter-ness along with it?
Yeah, I think potentially any time that we're doing something new and trying something that we're not familiar with, but back to that research that I mentioned earlier about how it seems to affect smart people more, I wonder why that is, because it's not necessarily true that just because you know a lot about something, you don't feel like an imposter sometimes. In fact, it's often the opposite is the case, right? And so I had an opportunity to give a presentation recently to a group of women in female computer scientists or computer scientists in the making, right? They're students at Montana State University, and they talk about how they often struggle with this, right? As computer scientists, they have to show up in an often very male-dominated world. They're obviously wicked smart. They wouldn't be in the major they're at and the program they're in if they're not. And yet this is a group that maybe struggles the most with feeling like an imposter. Like, is my code good enough? Like, do I even get to call myself a computer scientist or a programmer or whatever it is, right? And so I think that's that's an area where when you're working in highly specialized fields, and also if you are maybe of a minority, that can, even if you're operating at really high levels of performance, people often seem to be plagued by those feelings, those really vulnerable feelings of not fitting in, not belonging, or not being good enough. And Luke, you mentioned when we were talking earlier, brought up something that I've also come across this research, and you brought up the name of it, the Dunning-Kruger Effect. Could you share with us a little bit about that research and what the Dunning-Kruger Effect is?
Yeah, man, this is so interesting. And for anyone that's interested, just Google Dunning-Kruger Effect, and there's all sorts of memes about it and articles and funny science too, because it kind of leads to these, pointing out when someone is trapped inside the Dunning-Kruger Effect. But I think here's the simplest way to think about it. If we chart someone's confidence on one axis, let's say the up and down axis on a graph is confidence, and then the horizontal track is their actual ability at a task, right? Oftentimes we'll see what looks like a U charted in someone's confidence. Okay, so low ability, oftentimes people will just have some really bad assumptions because they don't even understand what the task is, what success at that task should look like, and their confidence will be artificially really high. But then as people learn about the task or about the problem, their confidence should drop over time and kind of start to draw that U. And then as someone becomes an expert in their field, they've practiced it many times, then we'll see that confidence start to go back up. But the Dunning-Kruger effect is like what really happens at that first part of the U that I described. Like, I think I'm an expert at something, but I have no idea what I'm even talking about. I saw a great example this morning. Someone was making fun of it on Twitter, but someone had basically posted a critique of, I don't know exactly what it was. It was, a public health agency made some sort of notice about, hey, we're going to be discussing next vaccine rollout phase at our meeting in 2 weeks. And someone had responded like, oh yeah, great plan while everyone's dying. And like that person who made that comment, they have this feeling or this belief that they know what that public health agency needs to do to roll out vaccines, that it's simple. You just meet, you make the decisions, you put in the orders, trucks show up, people get vaccines, right? But I suspect it's a lot more complex than that, and that the public health officials themselves are probably the people that feel the most pressure in our society to get it done and get it done quickly. And they're dealing with just a lot of complexity and are actually going to do it way faster and way better than, Joe Schmo on the sidelines making comments could actually get it done once they got into it. So that's an example of the Dunning-Kruger effect. It always makes a good, funny search, like Dunning-Kruger memes, if you want to see some people making fun of each other. But we all suffer from it, is what the science shows as well, is that all of us, if we don't really understand a task, overestimate our ability to do it. My wife gets to see this all the time because I say, oh yeah, I'll run that water line, or I'm going to put a beam in our house. Last year I decided I'm going to tear out a wall and put a beam in, right? And I was like, I think it's pretty complicated. I think it's going to take me, 2, maybe 3 weekends to get everything. I've got to order the beams. I've got to probably see if I can get it up through the attic space. Well, 6 weeks later, I get the beam installed. It was way more complicated. I had to rig up all these pulley systems, had to cut a hole in the ceiling of our living room because that's the only way these huge beams would fit in. Had to disconnect all the electrical on this wall as I tore it down. There's just all these things that I did not have. I had way more confidence in how quickly I could execute than I actually could. And so now, hopefully, I'm closer to the bottom of that U, right? A little bit lower confidence, but more information and more experience too. So, yeah. So Moving along, Hannah, I'm kind of curious, whether you have experienced that or seen that, or if you think there are things that maybe help people, gain that confidence, but in a healthy way, not in that Dunning-Kruger way.
Yeah, I think that, there are some tools, right, that you can use. And first of all, you have to just start doing the thing, right? Whether you feel ready or not, whether you feel like you have all the knowledge or not, you have to make decisions. And as leaders, we have to make decisions without having 100% of the information most of the time. We need to, it takes some courage, right, to step out and make a decision with only, let's say, 70% of the information. And then, as we've talked about, with experience, things do become we become more practiced, and we can build our confidence that way. And then, to not run into that fact of the more we know what we don't know, and allow that to interfere with our confidence. Again, it's a decision that we make, and it requires courage. It requires a lot of vulnerability, to step out and just say, I'm going to do this anyway. But one of the tools that we have is confidence. And I talk a lot about confidence, and when I meet with, groups of women in particular, because it's an area that many women, especially in professional fields that are often dominated by males. And so, and I don't say that to disparage or create any kind of undue gender roles here. But I'm a woman, and I often work with women, and this is often the experience where many women in technical fields especially tend to struggle with confidence, because so there's something called the confidence gap, right? And there's research to show that, for example, in a job application, a male applicant will apply for the job if he feels like he can check off about 60% of the requirements for the job, right? The other 40%, he's going to be more likely to say, I think I can learn that on the job. I think I got enough skills to apply for this job and to succeed in it. A female applicant is not going to apply for the job, or is not going to be as likely to apply for the job unless she can fill at least 90%, 90 to 100% of the requirement and say, yes, I absolutely have this experience, or I know this skill, right? And so what happens there is that women often take themselves out of the game before they even apply. And we see this often for leadership roles too. One of the reasons women aren't as quick often to apply for a leadership role within a company. And so that's the gap, right? If, two candidates are equally qualified and they have the same, level of education and experience, one is going to overstate their ability and one is going to understate their ability to themselves and in their own minds. That's the gap. So to address that, I encourage people to just look at confidence not as something that you have, but as something you do. Because often we think that if I don't feel confident, I can't come across as confident. And that's not really true, right? I showed a picture in this presentation I did recently of myself standing, kind of a pose. And it was a photographer that took this picture. And I'm standing in this pretty confident pose. And I just asked the audience, what did they see when they looked at that picture? And they said they saw confidence, they saw power and knowledge and a strong woman, all these things, right? And then I asked them, how do you think I felt when that picture was being taken? And, the answer is, I felt extremely awkward, really insecure and uncomfortable, right? So that's what was going on the inside. But what I projected outward and what people saw was a strong and confident woman, right? So there isn't always 100% alignment. And so does that make me an imposter? Does that make me a fraud? Well, maybe not, but what I know is that I have the ability to wield confidence. We talked about superpowers earlier, right? It's kind of this force field that you can activate, right? Your confidence is the first thing people buy from you. It enters the room, 25 feet ahead of you, and it's what people experience of you. It's like an energy that you project. And so you can absolutely 100% project confidence, even if you don't feel 100% confident on the inside. And you do that through body language, through a facial expression, through how you carry yourself, right? So there are things we can do to project confidence, and that will allow others to read us as a confident person. And the cool thing about that, right, we're sending a signal to someone else, and it affects how they respond to us by the way we carry ourselves and the way we use body language. We also are sending a signal to our own brain about how we should feel, right? So the same with smiling, and I think we've talked about that maybe on the podcast before, but if I smile, a smile is contagious. We have mirror neurons in the brain, and the other person is going to be more likely to smile back at us, which influences us to feel happier because we're being received in a friendly way, somebody smiling at us. But it also sends a signal to our own brain that we're happy and joyful, and we start feeling that way more. And same thing with body language and movement. Another, quote from Amy Cuddy's book, Presence, is that movement, like posture, tells the brain how it feels and even manages what it remembers. As walking becomes more open, upright, and buoyant, our memories about ourselves follow suit. So I think for me, that is probably the number one tool that we can use to actually help us feel more confident, is to just, act more confidently.
Oh, I love all of that. And I'm going to throw a couple American pop culture references in here just because I know it's going to throw Hannah for a loop, not grown up in the States. But, I was thinking as you were talking about Stuart Smalley. So he was a recurring character on Saturday Night Live in the 90s. And he was kind of a self-help guy, and he would end his sessions by kind of turning and looking at himself in the mirror and saying, "I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me." And to me that illustrates, I think, how I oftentimes have approached this idea of confidence, is that it's about how I feel, and I just have to talk to myself and feel differently if I'm actually going to be confident. And listening to you, it just brought up this alternative, which is, if confidence is a tool that I can wield, right, that both changes people's perception of me, but also, as I wield it, is going to actually empower me and kind of send that power coursing through me and my feelings eventually, right? Which I think we experience that. We are vulnerable, we step into something, and all of a sudden it's an hour later and we're like, "Oh, I'm doing pretty good right now. Great. Why was I worried?" Right? That makes me think about He-Man, right? So I used to watch He-Man Saturday morning cartoon all the time, growing up in rural Arkansas, right? And so he would reach back and he had this magic sword and pull it out and hold it aloft and say, "I have the power," and magic sword would activate, right? Get hit by lightning, activate, and he would transform. And, it's interesting that that's just a much more helpful image of how confidence works. Wield it and it will bring you power and influence the people around you. Not, well, I have to convince myself or do my reading or do my homework, although those are all important, right? And only when I truly feel like a master can I begin to operate in a way where I can be confident in the value that I bring.
No, it's so true. And actually that is a pop culture reference that I did get, the one about He-Man, because I also watched He-Man on Saturday mornings in Norway. So apparently that was a cartoon that was syndicated even in Norway. So yeah, He-Man and Skeletor and all of those characters. That was I think we were watching it until our parents figured out that there may or may not be some occult references, and then we were not allowed to watch it anymore. But I agree, that image. I have this little superhero figurine on my desk. So if you're watching on YouTube, I'm holding up a little kind of a Wonder Woman superhero figurine with, a woman standing in a female superhero standing in a power pose, like the shoulders back, hands on your hips, chest forward. And, Amy Cuddy's famous TED Talk about power poses, kind of illustrates that. But it's, how we can use our body language to inform how we feel. And then, the thought about, too, not just how we carry ourselves, but what are we telling ourselves? What's the internal monologue, that talk reel that's going on in our heads all day long? What is that inner monologue? What are we telling ourselves, right? So if our inner monologue is, oh man, you're so stupid, or you should have known that, like, that's really dumb of you, you just totally screwed up there. If that's the talk track that we're listening to, that our brain is listening to, I guarantee you that's going to affect how you feel as well, right? Because your brain is always listening. The subconscious mind is an incredibly powerful force. So because your brain's always listening, make sure that it hears what you want it to do, right? So that starts with our thoughts. What are the thoughts that we think? Are we thinking confident thoughts? Are we speaking confident words? And then are we making confident actions? And if we do that and are intentional about that, it definitely affects how we feel and how confident we feel. And, I think that's why positive affirmation is so powerful, right? And you mentioned the Stuart Smalley thing, and that it is really something that actually works, right? I have a practice. I have some affirmations that I say that I have written down, that I revisit. I try to every morning, kind of first thing before I start my day, I read them to myself, and I've actually recorded myself reading them. So I will even listen to my own voice reading affirmative statements to myself. And I've had that practice for probably 3 or 4 years now or more. And they kind of evolve, based on what are some of the things I want to make sure that I actually really believe about myself and about my abilities and the impact that I can have on the world, about the life I want to create for myself and the future and the people that I care about. And it's interesting as I've watched myself, evolve from starting to believe these things and watching myself put them into action, right? And it's because I started saying them to myself because it's something a belief I wanted to change, right? And I started affirming the belief I wanted to have, and that belief is taking hold, and then I'm making positive change as a result. So yeah, make sure you are affirming yourself in the ways that you want to show up powerfully. We have to think intentional thoughts, and we have to affirm those beliefs on a regular basis.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great personal testimony of someone really owning their neuroscience, right, of what's happening in their own mind, and using how our mind works to be more effective at fulfilling their purpose. So Hannah, I mean, that's just really inspirational, and I really appreciate your vulnerability even in sharing that, right? But where I feel like I'm really impressed by this whole thing is that sometimes I think kind of power poses and self-talk and affirmation, like people can make fun of it, like it can sound a little corny and cheesy, but I've heard you before take it the next level down to really explain why that's important, about, you know, why those things meet our deepest human needs, both for us as people who are trying to have agency in the world, and also for the people that we interact with, like how our confidence serves them and meets their needs. So I'd love for you to share some of that information and just, what are those underlying needs that some of these practices really meet?
Yeah, so I think confidence is great, right? It's a tool that we can use. But when it really comes down to it, some of the deepest human needs, and we talk about this a lot on the podcast, right? But the need to feel seen and to feel heard and to be valued, the need to be known by others, and the need to belong. Those are some of the deepest human needs. And confidence is just not enough to meet those needs, right? We can have all the confidence in the world, and yet if we don't feel like we belong, there's still a lack there, right? And there's still that we're still gonna probably always feel some sense of disconnect or some sense of I don't really fit in or I don't really belong. And so for me, I think what's important to keep in mind here is, if we think about the times that we do feel like we belong. And when I ask audiences that question, it often has everything to do with, well, it's when I'm with my family, or when I'm with my best friend, or when I'm with a group of people that have similar interests to me. So those are some of the times that we feel the most connected. And so what does it mean to connect meaningfully with other human beings? Well, first of all, it does require a certain level of vulnerability, right? Real connection requires vulnerability. And we can talk about superpowers and tools and shields and armor and the different things that we put on to get ready for the battle of life sometimes, right? But when it comes to real connection, it actually requires that we lower the shield, that we take off the masks and the armor, and that we show up as who we really are, right? With our fears, our insecurities, and all. And that's when we're able to create real, strong, meaningful, connection and intimacy with other people, which is what we need to feel fulfilled as humans. So, in order to feel more connected, we need to connect more, right? So we can, by creating more connection for more people, we can have a greater impact, right? That requires that we change our focus from an inward focus on ourselves. And there's something in that word to be self-conscious, right? A self-conscious person is very conscious of themselves. So if we feel self-conscious, it's because we're very focused on ourselves and our own internal state, right? And that adds to the sense of insecurity or anxiety that we're having in like public speaking is a perfect example where that anxiety becomes really real. When we're really nervous about a presentation, it's because we're thinking about saying everything just right or coming across as knowledgeable, and we want to be seen in a certain light, and we don't want to look dumb or dorky, right? So we become very internally focused, and that contributes to the insecurity. So to be less self-conscious, we have to focus less on the self and more on the needs of others. So if that means you're making a presentation to an audience, you focus on that audience. What is it that they need from me right now? How do they need me to show up? what do I need to say to make a connection with this individual in the audience right now? And that shifts your focus away from yourself to an outward focus. And, we talk a lot about mindset, and we'll be talking about outward mindset on this podcast at some point and what that means, right? But that's really focused on having an impact outside of yourself. And then kind of the final point on that for me is that if I want to feel like I belong, the best way I can do that is to help others feel like they belong. So if I can be a friend to someone else, if I can help create a meaningful connection, if I can create a bridge for someone who maybe looks like they're not feeling comfortable with the group, right? That don't feel like they're part of what's going on. If I can reach out and help them feel included, I'm going to create more connection and more belonging for myself as well.
Yeah, man, such good stuff. I like so many things in life work that way, right? The more I focus on my own happiness, the less happy I am, right? That's been shown to be true in psychological studies. And with this confidence thing, the more that my confidence is built on me getting my needs met, the less effective it is. Whereas if I just say, you know what, I've got a few tools, I'm going to show up here, and what I really want to do is like help meet the needs of other people and help them be successful, right? We can short circuit some of that imposter syndrome thinking. So, wow. So how do we do that? Like, what are I know you mentioned outward mindset. We're going to share some tools about that soon. We've been having some great conversations about it. And it truly simply is just, are we focused on meeting our own needs or meeting the needs of others in a day-to-day way and in the roles that we work and play in? But just really practically, if we were going to close this out with action items around imposter syndrome, what do you boil it down to? What should someone just keep in mind as they're moving into a situation that they know for them has sparked that imposter syndrome in the past?
I would say 3 things. Number 1, make the decision, even if you don't have all the facts. If you got 70% of the information, make the decision. Number 2, keep doing the thing. Do the thing, keep showing up. And number 3, monitor your inner dialogue or inner monologue and really pay attention to what are the messages that you're sending yourself through your thoughts, your words, and your action. And then, of course, the 4th thing, even though I said 3, is to focus externally on how you can make an impact on others rather than on how you feel inside.
Man, what an awesome real life example, right? Just be confident, go with the 3 points, but then know that we can iterate and make it even better. So great real time example. I think if I was going to think about takeaways, like Hannah said it all, the only thing I would add is like, watch out for the Dunning-Kruger effect. We need to be confident. But also, if you really don't know anything about something, like, make sure you're getting feedback. We've had lots of conversations on this podcast about feedback and the importance of community, importance of reflection. But if and when you do fall into the Dunning-Kruger effect trap, please email us and let us know so we can laugh about it with you. So ending on a light note, but thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I'm just going to put a plug in for Hannah here. I think anyone who listened to this heard her passion and knowledge about this subject in particular. I do know that she's had really meaningful impact in the lives of lots of professional women who are struggling with this. Hannah's an excellent coach. And to connect with her or anyone else on our team, reach out to us. Find us on social media. You can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com. And we would love to talk to you and experience walk through some of the journey of these experiences with imposter syndrome and hopefully give you a few tools along the way. So thanks so much for joining, and hope everyone has an amazing day.